Good morning, everybody, from a very sunny London. My name's Jonathan Leach, and I'm Director of Commodity Research here at Kpler. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to our webinar today. Today, I'm joined by Alessandro Armenia from the Energy Analyst team. He's going to be talking to us today regarding solar curtailment in Europe. I think social curtailment is a very different thing. So basically, the problem of the sun shining too much. It's a really interesting topic, and I'm looking forward to hearing about it. Alessandro is going to be talking for about 20 minutes, and that should leave us with 5 or 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. Now, the Q&A can be accessed, we want your questions. So there's a button down at the bottom of your screen for Q&A. If you click on that and type in your question, we'll try and answer as many of them as possible. As you can see on your screen, there is a QR code there to download the report. And if you're a bit more old school like me, I've also posted a link into the webinar chat. So if you access that, you'll be able to follow the path directly to the download page. So, as I said, I'm very pleased to be joined by Alessandro, and I'll hand over to him now to start us off. Thank you.
Thanks, John, and hello, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yep, we can hear you perfectly.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, John. So yeah, hello, everyone, and thanks for joining our webinar this morning. I'll briefly present myself. My name is Alessandro Armenia. I'm a power analyst at Kpler, based in Paris, and I will be your host today. So for those who do not know Kpler, Kpler is the go-to source data provider for physical markets, under which LNG, natural gas, and power lie naturally within. We do have our real-time data, proprietary forecasts, and actionable insights that facilitate trading decisions and support forward-looking businesses. And now, as part of the actionable insights, solar curtailment is definitely a hot topic in power markets today. So today, I will be presenting the phenomenon of solar curtailment and discuss the white paper results and the findings, which you can find, let's say, in the QR code as well to download the solar curtailment report. But yes, without further ado, let's start. Okay. Now, what's on the agenda today? Today, we're going to talk about the origins, the drivers of solar curtailment. Then we're going to discuss the impact that this has had in Europe, both from a financial perspective and from quantifying volumes. Then we're going to also pass into a discussion trying to understand how can the power system adapt to limit solar curtailment, what were the past policies, what were the current policies, and then we're going to end up with a brief conclusion and our main takeaways. Okay. So to start to talk about the origins and the drivers, let's take a step back, talk about fundamentals, and look into the supply curve. When we look into the solar power generation in Europe, well, this has grown a lot in the past few years. And when we look into this year's curve compared to the past few years, we can register a 40% increase in solar generation. Now, this increase in supply has not only been driven by solar, but also by other generation types. And so when we think about this growth in supply, and then we look into the other curve, we look into the demand curve in Europe, this has been more or less stagnant since COVID times, since we faced the gas crisis. We can just register a 1% increase, which is basically nothing compared to last year. So we have an increase in supply, we have a flattened demand, and another aspect to take into consideration is the grid inflexibility. So the design of our infrastructure, which has been designed in the past for a more centralized system, it is currently on a degree of inflexibility. And how can we measure, how can we signal this in terms of data, in terms of market? Well, negative prices is one example. When we look into the growth of negative price hours in the major countries, such as Spain, France, Belgium, or Germany, this has registered an increase in H1 2025 of 80% compared to last year. So we do have a growth in supply, stagnant demand, grid inflexibility, and these drivers, more or less, have caused the ideal conditions for solar curtailment to emerge in Europe. So what is solar curtailment? As a definition, solar curtailment, we all agree, is the deliberate reduction of electricity that is generated from solar assets. And when we try to identify the categories of solar curtailment, well, we came up with two types of categories on a macro level. So on one side, we can define economic curtailment as the curtailment that is being done by an asset manager, and it is being done essentially shutting down the plant because it is financially unattractive to inject in the grid or to produce. So the causes are mostly related to market action, to negative prices. The decision timing is done on a day ahead, so a day before, or it can also be done in the intraday when, for example, he changes his position. So these are all based on price forecasts. And when it comes to talking about revenue streams, well, as you can imagine, the asset manager is shutting down the plant and he has no revenue stream. So there are no profits in taking this action. When we talk about also day-ahead decision, we can also think about, for example, an asset manager that has placed an offer, also negative, which has not been accepted because maybe the market has cleared at more negative pricing, and therefore the revenue stream, yes, is null unless to specifically linked subsidy designs that are like on a case-to-case basis, let's say. Then on the other side, let's consider the situation where the grid is stressed. Probably most of the times these two conditions overlap. And in real time, we define technical curtailment, the curtailment that is undertaken by the TSO, activating or calling the solar farms to deliberately shut down or ramp down in order to support the grid, because maybe the causes of our physical constraints or grid stability needs, for example, congestion, voltage, frequency issues, all of these topics that we have been recurrently hearing in the past few months. So the decision maker in this case is the system operator. The decision timing is in real time. And in this case, the asset is remunerated because this shutdown that is called by the TSO is seen as a service to support grid stability. So we can agree more or less that on a broad level, solar curtailment can be either economic, that is driven by producers and market auctions, or technical, that is triggered by TSOs in real time. Okay, so when we come to quantify solar curtailment, when we have data, we define solar curtailment as the delta between the grid potential feed-in and the actual generation. Now, what do I mean? When we refer to the historical volumes, we do have an uncurtailed forecast, which is essentially representing the solar potential feed-in generation. This essentially represents the total amount of potential production that can be fed into a country or a bidding zone by a determined geographical location. And at a certain point, we will have the actuals. So the actual injected volumes from solar assets, which are published by public official sources like NSOE or EEX or any other TSO. And therefore, when we look into the delta between the yellow curve and the red curve, we quantify what are the curtailment volumes. Now, this is a standardized approach that we use so that we can essentially expand across all the countries in Europe. And it is a proprietary result because, as you can see and you can read, the solar potential feed-in generation is an uncurtailed forecast that is brought by Kpler. And when it comes to predicting the future, well, of course, we cannot rely on actuals because actuals is data that is being published after things have effectively occurred. So here comes in also Kpler's curtailed forecast, which is the blue curve. It is based on machine learning, and it is trained to understand the relationship between solar radiation intensity and curtailed volumes. It also takes into account geographical distribution at a regional level, as well as regional weather forecasts and weather parameters. Now, I don't want to get into more technical details, but if you're curious to know more about our machine learning methodology, let's take this conversation offline. But generally speaking, we can all agree that we use the same methodology, so delta between the two curves. But for the sake of the historical, for the sake of the white paper, and also because actuals are, no matter what, way more precise than forecasts by definition, we based ourselves on historical volumes for the white paper. And also, I'd like to point out that the curtailed forecasts, since are day ahead and they're based on price forecasts, predict the primary driver of curtailment, which is economic curtailment. Now, let's discuss more about findings and results from the white paper. what we can say is that solar curtailment has been accelerating in 2025. Kpler currently tracks 7.3 terawatt hour of curtailment volumes as of the end of June. Now, to put these numbers into perspectives, 7.3 terawatt hours is more or less the yearly production of a nuclear reactor that has a capacity of more or less of 900 megawatts and runs almost at high capacity, at high load factors. So it's pretty a lot. Now, on the left side, you can see a graph that has a matrix that explains a bit the distribution of curtailed volume and curtailment share. Just to provide the definition of what is curtailment share, it is essentially the ratio between the curtailed output, so the delta that we've seen, and the solar potential grid feed-in, which we've seen before is the yellow curve, and is essentially the curtailed volumes plus the delivered volumes. So when we look into this graph, Spain, France, Germany, Poland, they have the highest curtailment shares. And when we look into a year-on-year increase, well, there are some countries that have registered a significant increase this year. We talk about France, Poland, Netherlands, and Austria, while Spain has maintained, let's say, its number one position, but has seen a slight decrease. But overall, we can agree that curtailment volumes have increased tenfold compared to last year, which is a significant amount. Now, shifting a bit into financials and into solar profitability, what can we see? Well, first of all, we try to define the market value loss. The market value loss is essentially the product between the day-ahead prices when these are negative times the solar actual, so the solar that was effectively injected. It effectively gives us an idea of how much how much loss the solar producers had to incur to stay in the merit curve, in the merit order, and like lose essentially part of their revenue streams. There is more than 450 million euros of loss tracked in the Cori region. And what stands out is that while Spain, France, Portugal, for example, had high curtailment shares, here the losses are very flat because negative prices stay kind of flat in these countries, while Netherlands and Germany have very high market value losses. This kind of reflects the deep price collapses that these countries sees, and also, let's say, ties to old policy focuses and must-run solar volumes, so insensitive solar assets that are injecting the grid no matter what is the price that is being formed. Other systems like France and Spain have more flexibility and have more chances to, let's say, absorb or decrease the deep price collapses. And therefore, it represents, yes, an idea of how much loss can be in the market. Now, another way to look into the solar profitability decline is the solar capture rate, which is defined as the ratio between the average day-ahead solar revenue and the average day-ahead price. It can be on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, but no matter how we see it, we can see that in Europe, taking into account almost all the countries, there has been a clear trend over the last 4 years, a 20% yearly floor decrease. And if we move into the next slide, and looking into the future, what do we see in terms of solar capture rates? Well, Kpler expects a dip to 10% next year in 2026, when it will come to spring season and summer season. Now, we do have all these types of forecasts, short-term, long-term, when it comes to curtailment forecasts for day ahead, capture prices and capture rates. And this essentially provides some forward-looking tools for anyone to assess profitability, to assess decisions in their day-to-day work for trading or for asset management. And moreover, when we discussed a bit how to tackle and how to mitigate solar curtailment in the white paper, the idea essentially was shifting from production maximization to value optimization. So in the first slide, we discussed about the causes, and we do all agree that while causes are similar, there's not really a silver bullet to mitigate solar curtailment. Each country has a different structural power mix and has different key flexibility sources. And so it is important to leverage key flexibility resources and also to understand the power mix to design and minimize solar curtailment. Here is a table that has been essentially copy-pasted from the report. It talks about the dominant sources from the major countries curtailing solar, their key flexibility sources, what were the historical solar subsidy schemes with a bit of more in-depth, and then also presenting a bit what are the current policy focuses and what could be their impact. We also spoke about California's CAISO electricity market. So CAISO is California's electricity market because we do believe it is a global benchmark for solar integration. Now, if we look into last year, in 2024, 93% of the curtailment volumes from CAISO were coming from solar assets, and their capacity in terms of battery energy storage is more than 13 gigawatts. So forward-looking market that we can take learnings and inspiration from when it comes to Europe. And CAISO takes a pragmatic approach. They actually plan for curtailment. What does that mean? They model it and they assume it as a least cost feature. In short, if curtailment is the least expensive feature to implement in the future or in a time frame, instead of, for example, building infrastructure, capacity, or batteries, well, then they will, let's say, essentially include it in the planning. So to wrap it up and to provide a bit of more ideas and more flavor to the potential changes and the potential implementations that we could actually go through in Europe for the future to mitigate solar curtailment, theoretically to reach to zero, but on a certain extent to mitigate it as much as we can. There are solutions that combine demand response, battery deployment, there are market solutions, there are policy angles. But as of today, there are more red thumbs in the slide than green thumbs. So the progress is still too slow. When it comes to demand, definitely an imperative is to boost baseload demand. There is the industrialization problem, which is affecting us all. Then there is the strategy of investing in data centers, which is currently a hot topic as well. It is unrolling, but we have not done enough to electrify heat and transport sectors. When it comes to accelerating flexibility resources, one option could be promoting a bit more heavy energy players to, let's say, enter into a dynamic pricing like industrials. We could also implement more demand response services. I mean, an example is vehicle to grid or dynamic water heating, a system that is a bit more mature in the Nordics, as well as enhancing and promoting more consumer behavior tools. Two examples that came in mind were Kpler. They are a company. They are essentially, in short, I hope that there is not the CEO listening, but like they are residential demand aggregators, and they aggregate demand and then they offer it in the balancing markets. And then there's also Octopus Energy. Recently, with their apps, they're trying to promote demand consumption during times of negative pricing to, let's say, increase the demand when there is too much supply. Another option is scheduling curtailment, as CAISO, like under CAISO's learnings, and also using operating windows for asset. This has been a strategy that's been adopted already in the Netherlands, has started with some contracts for batteries. But the idea is we have operating windows that are contractually set in advance, and therefore some assets can only operate during these times and are remunerated also for these, let's say, decisions of operating windows. This is to avoid building overcapacity in the transmission line and to, let's say, have less chances to handle simultaneous peaks. I mean, an evergreen always is a battery energy storage. We should invest always. It is never boring to say it. We're promoting standalone hybrid projects or co-located storage retrofits. This essentially pools renewable energy excess production and absorbs it. And to a certain extent, it allows us to optimize CapEx intensive grid infrastructure investments. Another way to tackle grid infrastructure is by shifting from grid following inverters to grid forming inverters. An interesting, an interesting inverter which essentially allows the grid, allows the asset to become active from passive. So essentially, when the grid needs stability, when it needs to ramp up or down, assets like renewable energy that cannot decide how to ramp up or down, that is being done by the inverter. And then, last but not least, never enough to say, phasing out from legacy feed-in tariffs. These are totally insensitive to grid injection and causes strains. And while these can benefit in the short term, let's say some assets, in the long term, yeah, it caused solar curtailment and negative prices. So some ideas, there's France, for example, that has shifted to a feed-in premium model. There's also Germany that has made some recent amendments in the EEG Act, trying to incentivize feed-in tariffs to shift into a new model by promoting some nice incentives. But there's so many things to talk about. I am going to stop here, and I'm going to end up here the presentation, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Alessandro, thank you very much indeed for that. I think you did a great job of highlighting the excellent work that you and the team have been doing. And I will, recommend everyone follow the QR code or the link in the chat to download the white paper. So we've had a good list of questions that have come through on the Q&A already, but there should be time to answer a couple more. So if you do have any questions, do feel free to post them in the Q&A box. So if we can start off with, how do you think the 15 market time unit change will impact solar curtailment?
Thanks, John. Yeah, that's a good question. So if you ask me, I think that solar curtailment, the 15 market time unit will help mitigate solar curtailment. We can identify two reasons. The first one is that it's going to smoothen the ramp downs from a certain extent. So it's going to give more space to solar to generate. And second reason, it tends to support regional weather patterns. So if the sun is back, for example, there's no need to wait anymore an hour, but solar assets after 15 minutes can start to, can have placed the bids and start to deliver more into the grid.
Okay, and next one is, why is Italy not present on your Europe list or map?
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, since the start of the year, ENSOE has been publishing erroneous data for Italy's generation data, and this appears to be linked to the 15-minute market time unit switch, and sometimes the data is 4 times higher, sometimes it's lower. So this has a bit, let's say, given us some challenges. On the bright side, though, ENSOE has acknowledged that the work is in progress to improve the data quality, and we're expecting this year to have the data available on its transparency portal.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. And the next one, what if some volumes are not really curtailed but absorbed by co-location storage?
Yeah, this is absolutely a possible scenario, and we are preparing for it. However, as things stand today, let's say that the battery installed capacity and the injected volumes in the grid are so minimal that the impact of co-located storage is very negligible. So we have not considered, let's say, those volumes when it comes to our analysis. But yeah, definitely that's a good point to consider in the future.
Thanks. And maybe related to this, how do we estimate the potential solar generation, and how do we know if low production is from curtailment or from weather?
Yeah, that's another good point. When it comes to, evaluating the solar feed-in generation, we have the uncurtailed forecast. So essentially, our model has been tracking on a granular level all of the utility assets, and learning also from the actuals, from the uncurtailed actuals. So it understands based on irradiation intensity how much can all the plants at maximum level produce, and therefore from the machine learning model, from the past, it learns essentially what is the maximum feed in. Then there are other features, of course, inside, which I mean, we can talk in detail offline, but we don't want to disclose all of our let's say proprietary information. And sorry, what was the second question, John?
So it was basically, how do we work out how much is weather and how much is well, how much is curtailment?
Yeah, so it's very difficult. So if it's trackable, so if the weather forecast enables us and gives us signal, then this is clearly also embedded into the solar feed-in generation. And if you have access to a terminal, you will see that sometimes the yellow curves, so the feed-in generation, have some zigzags, even despite those are uncurtailed forecasts, because they take into account maybe some cloudy hours or some cloudy aspects. But if there's like an immediate thunderstorm, I guess that nobody is really able to predict that, right? So we kind of then rely on the actuals to estimate the volumes, or we try to do the best.
Thanks. And interesting one. So countries keep installing new solar capacity year after year. What's the incentive in doing so? Doesn't it just increase curtailment and reduce profits?
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess that a lot of projects have been I mean, has started to develop also several years ago, and now only like recently with the soaring of installed capacity, we have started to see solar curtailment. So maybe some dynamics that maybe we were expecting to come a bit later. Definitely standalone solar is no more a profitable business model, if you ask me. So solar is cheap. It's not an expensive asset, and at the end of the day, I mean, yeah, I honestly I do not see, unless linked to subsidy designs, profitability for new projects in the future, unless they are linked to hybrid systems, so to batteries or to storage, let's say retrofits.
Thank you. Now, I've got about 5 questions here that are all, interlinked. So I'll try and combine them into one here. Basically, what people are talking about is the difference between, say, the Netherlands and German market.
Yes.
Why a price? Why is it, effectively a poor market? And maybe if you can compare that to, say, France and Spain, what are the differences there?
Yeah. So if you think about the power mix, Germany and the Netherlands have coal and gas. But okay, Germany has significant amounts of coal and gas. The Netherlands also relies on coal and gas, and the Netherlands are net exporters. So let's say the flexibility sources are kind of limited. They don't have a way to mitigate like Netherlands, for example, doesn't have a way to mitigate nationally solar excess, apart from because they're exporting. So apart from dropping deeply into negative prices and continuously exporting, they don't have really a way to mitigate. And Germany more or less has the same scenario. So they export when prices go super negative, because otherwise nobody would absorb their energy. And they are kind of tight when solar and wind disappear, so they have to import a lot. They're kind of weather dependent. Germany is very weather dependent. Um, they have very little storage. Like batteries, yes, they're starting to increase now, but they are not naturally countries with a lot of hydropower. And coming to the comparison with Spain and France, this is a good example, because France and Spain have, I mean, because Mother Nature blessed them, a lot of hydropower. They have the Alps and the Pyrenees, and this enables them to absorb and to be more flexible when it comes to grid dynamics. Now, France has also nuclear that is modulating, so it helps also to, let's say, absorb the solar excess. But as we're seeing now, also this degree of flexibility that is coming from nuclear is almost, let's say, at an end point. And so it's curious to see now how France has increased a lot the curtailment share, right? Because it looks like their degree of flexibility is being challenged now.
Okay, thank you. And I guess a bit of a follow-on to that. Is there an optimal ratio for backup versus solar? for the EU? Or, I mean, I'd imagine it's sort of case by case, isn't it? Location by location. But, is there an optimal ratio?
Excellent question. I think there should, like, everyone should find one, because in that way, as we were talking before in one of the slides, um, when we come into planning curtailment and therefore finding this as the least expensive option. I mean, curtailment, of course, from a theoretical basis, it should never occur. But if we want a clean and cheap energy transition, uh, then solar, we cannot really control weather patterns. So it's good to have a bit of curtailment, if you ask me, if we want to continue a low carbon grid. But yeah, it's a matter of a trade-off between how much can we curtail and how much do we have to invest in other features to slowly then mitigate more solar curtailment and absorb more. So option, just to answer, I don't know the optimal ratio, but it's definitely a parameter that will be interesting on a case-to-case basis to find out.
Okay, great. And I think we'll do one more question. So you mentioned California. Obviously we're focusing on Europe today, but you mentioned California in your presentation. Are there any lessons that Europe can learn from other parts of the world outside of California?
Another excellent question. I think another market to look into is Australia, because they're also seeing a lot of solar curtailment. And what we can learn essentially are either how they're mitigating solar curtailment, or also what are the problems that some countries are facing into solar curtailment, or shutting down solar plants because of excess. So definitely pointing to Australia, and not a lot of liberal markets left. So yeah, I would say, yeah, I look at them.
All right. Well, look, Alessandro, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed your presentation. I hope the audience did as well. I think we got round to sort of answering in general most of the questions. If we didn't answer your one exactly, thank you for setting the question. If you, want us to go into more detail, feel free to contact us. And as we'd said a couple of times, access the QR code or the link and you'll be able to download the report. And we'd be very happy to talk to you in more detail about it. So, Alessandro, thank you again. And to our audience today, thank you very much indeed for your attention and your questions. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.